And it is an absolute honor to welcome you here today for this important conversation. And it is my role to welcome you as one of the co-hosts to today's event, along with others that includes the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration, the University of Massachusetts at Boston, on whose campus we're at, and thank you, Chancellor, and where, of course, this institute is based. The Harvard Graduate School of Education, and the Immigration Initiative at Harvard. You'll be hearing from the leaders of these organizations during the course of this morning. I would also like to offer a special welcome to our guests from the Office of Citizenship, Partnership, and Engagement from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. For those of you in person, I hope you really take in the chamber that you're in. It's an exact replica of the United States Senate chamber. And for those more than 700 of you joining us from afar, we're really grateful for your participation as well, joining us online. This school year in this chamber, 15,000 students will come through those doors, and they'll come in to act as a senator for a day. And they'll work with their classmates right here to find common ground on immigration reform. The Institute works every single day to encourage civic education and civic participation, and to promote the idea that all voices should be heard in our democracy. And immigration is one of our topics that we have focused on now for several years running. Standing in this chamber and in this institute, I feel a sense of duty for another reason as well. In 1965, Senator Kennedy was the chair of the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Refugees and Escapees. And that year he co-sponsored and managed a bill that became the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, a bill that attempted to end discriminatory U.S. immigration practices by repealing the national origins quota system that favored some countries over others. And I was telling folks recently that basically a week doesn't go by where someone doesn't approach me and say, I'm here, my family is here because of that legislation. At such a consequential time in American history, we work to build on that legacy of impact. Our public conversations and convening, similar to today's forum, assemble diverse leaders for engaging conversations that bring together a variety of perspectives to address the fundamental issues confronting our society. Standing in Boston, Massachusetts, is not lost on us that we are in a center, sorry for everyone else in the country, we are in a center for higher education. We are in the center of a thriving knowledge-based economy, and one that is built on the contributions of immigrants in biotech, in computer science, and so much more. And we are also in a city where 1/3 of our beautiful population is foreign-born, and many more are the children of immigrants. And so it is in that context that we are grateful to be able to join you as one of the co-hosts of this important discussion related to immigration and higher education. And through the partnerships and discussions like these, the President's Alliance, and each one of you through your powerful institutions and in your own ways are capable of achieving so much. We're grateful to have people participating from higher education, from government, from nonprofits and the private sector. And so it is just genuinely my honor to welcome you to the Institute. Now, I have the honor of introducing Deputy Assistant Secretary for Immigration Policy in the United States Department of Homeland Security, Mr. Adam Hunter. Mr. Hunter has more than 15 years of experience on migration, national security, and international affairs. Before assuming his role at DHS, he was the Executive Director of the Refugee Council USA, working to protect and welcome refugees, asylum seekers, and other forcibly displaced populations. He was director of a Pew Charitable Trust research project examining or exploring immigration through the lens of federalism, and a consultant to several foundations and nonprofit organizations. During a previous tenure in government, Mr. Hunter served as acting chief of staff at the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Earlier in his career, he worked with policymakers in Europe and at Washington think tanks. I'm also glad to see Mr. Hunter holds a master's degree from the Harvard Kennedy School, and to underscore that I think he has a wonderful first name and a skilled and thoughtful barber. Mr. Hunter, the floor is yours, or Adam, I should say. The floor is yours.
Good morning, and just call me the other Adam. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you all today, and really a true honor to be here in this chamber and at the Edward M. Kennedy Institute. As is clearly known amongst this group, but merits restating, Senator Kennedy was an unparalleled leader and stalwart champion of immigrants and America. He fundamentally shaped the trajectory of our nation as a nation of immigrants. I want to thank as well Miriam Feldman and the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration, two areas, in fact, where America actually lives up to its greatness. Our higher education institutions are the envy, the dynamic envy of the world. Our immigration story is inherently intertwined with our success as a nation and continues to be a beacon of hope and freedom for newcomers coming today. I want to also give thanks to my friend and colleague, Ava Malona from the USCIS Office of Citizenship and Public Engagement. The Biden-Harris administration is committed and continues to work with all stakeholders to ensure that our immigration system can function, can be reformed, and that immigrants can integrate and belong, most importantly, belong in their communities. The president put forward a series of legislative proposals right upon taking office and issued several weeks later a series of executive orders that continue to guide our work, particularly in the areas of eliminating unnecessary barriers and restoring faith in our immigration system. We are doing everything in our power to preserve and fortify DACA, and we support the president's effort to expand health coverage, most recently to DACA recipients. I can also acknowledge we've had a fair number of challenges and even setbacks. Among them, of course, unprecedented global displacement and surging irregular migration in our hemisphere. These are phenomena affecting higher education as well. Our colleges and universities enroll many different non-citizen students, navigating increasingly complex circumstances that reflect these global trends. There are international students who are studying here to gain skills that they seek to bring back and build their homelands. There are international students who are seeking to stay and find work and live in the United States. And there's probably a lot of international students who haven't made up their minds what they actually want. There are refugee students who are displaced and cannot return home. And of course, there are students who know no other home but here, but yet, due to their status or lack thereof, face barriers to achieving their dreams. It's critical that we work together to ensure that all students have the opportunity to achieve their full potential, regardless of their background or immigration status. As an administration, we support creating pathways for students to work, stay, and even become citizens if they choose. However, we need Congress to act. There's been no significant immigration reform in decades, and clearly our laws don't reflect the way we live, study, work, move in the 21st century, nor do they reflect our aspirations for the future. I'm pleased, though, that higher education is not waiting, but rather forging that future. It's where discoveries are made, ideas refined, and where students gain experiences that shape their careers and lives. I don't need to tell this room or our audience today the extensive import of international students and immigrant students and faculty to all of making that magic happen. Our diverse campuses nurture minds and experiences. They're places where all students, including the US-born, are faced with and learn to navigate difference. I'm pleased that so many distinguished leaders and institutions embrace higher education's role in building inclusive democracy and shaping the America of our future, and look forward to the agenda we're going to traverse together this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Assistant Secretary Hunter. Those were really powerful remarks, and we're so glad that you and your colleagues are participating today. Welcome. My name is Miriam Feldblum. I'm the Executive Director of the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration, a group of over 550 presidents and chancellors from higher education institutions from across the country who've come together on the immigration issues that impact our students, our institutions, and our communities. The President's Alliance has had the great privilege of co-hosting this event with EMKI Institute, Kennedy Institute, and its CEO, Adam Hines, with UMass Boston and its Chancellor, Marcelo Suarez Orozco, and the Immigration Initiative at Harvard and its director, Dr. Carola Suarez Orozco. We are so grateful for your support. We wouldn't be here today without the support of our co-hosts as well as our sponsors, and I would like to take a special thank you to the Spencer Foundation for its generous grant to support these proceedings, as well as to all of our members. Welcome, online audience. As Adam mentioned, we had over 700 registrants from hundreds of campuses from across the country. We're so excited that you are here, that you're joining the conversation, and we'd like to invite you to join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag #HigherEdLowerBarriers, and follow us on Twitter at ImpresAlliance. Before introducing our first panel, I want to say a few words about why we're here today and the purpose of today's conversations. There's so many reasons why we're delighted to have this conversation in Massachusetts, the home state of the distinguished Senator Edward Kennedy, and as been mentioned, who was a Lion of the Senate and a lifelong champion of immigrants. And just recently, Senators Ed Markey and Elizabeth Warren co-sponsored the New Deal for New Americans Act to establish the National Office of New Americans and to reduce obstacles to U.S. citizenship and further facilitate the integration of immigrants into our social, economic, cultural, and civic lives. We are pleased that representatives from their Senate offices are able to join with us today as well. The conversations today will illuminate the importance of higher education in facilitating immigration pathways, developing talent and potential, and reducing barriers to integration and naturalization. As Adam mentioned, this is work that's already ongoing. We haven't waited for policy change. We're already working with students and faculty and our community members. While research has shown and has made clear that supporting pathways towards work eligibility, permanent residence, and citizenship for domestic immigrant students, including Dreamers, international students, and refugee students, is in our national interest. It strengthens our national defense, fuels our economy, spurs innovation, enhances our community, and helps drive our future demographic growth. Yet, what's next, why it matters, and how we can engage more into the conversation and into our work is not as clear. How are we in higher education partnering with government officials, federal, state, and local, with business, labor, immigration advocates, and more to advance these forward-looking policy goals? How can we intentionally and strategically embrace our role as an immigration pathway and to help accelerate immigrant inclusion for campuses and community members? What does this all look like on the ground? Our panelists have answers and ideas. Please note that we've shared the audience questions that have come in with your registration to the panelists so that it can inform their conversations. And we'll be sharing additional ways for you to engage in the conversation as part of our follow-up. So now let me switch and introduce our distinguished first panel, An American Story, Higher Ed and Immigration, and its set of panelists. I can't do justice to our panelists' distinguished careers in so short a time. So please note that for audience members here, there is a QR code in your program that will lead to the bios, and that for the virtual audience, we have full bios on our website. Look for this event under briefings on the website. We start with Dr. Marcelo Suarez Orozco, Chancellor of the University of Massachusetts, Boston, who will be serving as our moderator. Marcelo was recently named one of Boston's most influential men of color. Congratulations. More long-lasting, perhaps, is Marcelo's is a nationally renowned immigration scholar, a leader in thinking about these issues, author of numerous scholarly essays and award-winning books. Marcelo will be joined by 3 higher education leaders: Esther Benjamin, CEO and Executive Director of the World Education Services, Dr. Pam Ettinger, President of the Bunker Hill Community College, and Dr. Javier Reyes, currently Chancellor at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and who is the incoming Chancellor at UMass Amherst. Congratulations, Javier, on that selection. Esther is a leading voice in international education and is also a visiting fellow with the Skulls Center for Social Entrepreneurship at the Said Business School at the University of Oxford. During President Obama's administration, Esther led global operations for the Peace Corps, and she has extensive experience in both the public and private spheres and on national and global boards. Pam is a leader in immigrant education, community college education, and innovative partnerships. She's been president of Bunker Hill Community College since 2013 and was named in 2016 by President Obama as a champion for change. She continues to exceed that title. Javier is an economist, and before assuming the role of chancellor at UCI, Javier was UIC's provost and academic leader and has held academic leadership positions at West Virginia University and the University of Arkansas. He's known for his leadership in growing research and academic programs. We're so grateful and thrilled to have them join us. I'd like to invite them to come join up here, and I will hand it over to you, Marcelo. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure. It's so wonderful. Miriam, thank you so much for convening us here for this important conversation. Adam número uno and Adam número dos, thank you. Thank you for, Senator, thank you for hosting us here. Undersecretary, thank you for your voice and for your endeavors in this very, very significant work. It's so good to see all of you. So when FDR, in his famous opening line to the daughters of the American Revolution, said, "My fellow Americans," he got a laughter. "My fellow Americans, my fellow immigrants," I'm sorry. FDR said, "My fellow immigrants." My fellow immigrants, welcome.
Thank you.
It's so good to have you. All of us embody in our journey as immigrants, as educators, that duality. The great psychologist, maybe the most important psychologist in the 20th century, once said, education can be defined with one word: possibility. That's a great Jerry Bruner. Immigration can be defined by what word? Possibility. So we share that journey. I was born in Argentina. I had to leave my country at age 17 I came to the United States. I went to a uniquely American and great, great institution in our country, the community college system. If you're an immigrant in our country today and you go to college, you go to community college. And then transfer to the other great public university system in our country, the University of California at Berkeley. My journey, your journeys, is informed by the duality of possibilities, education and immigration. As leaders in higher education, share with us how you think about how your journey as immigrants informs your work in higher education. Pam.
All right, I will start. Good morning, everybody. I would be remiss not to acknowledge other community college leaders in the audience from Massachusetts. We do have in the audience Dr. Lane Glenn from Northern Essex Community College, and we have President Phil Sisson from Middlesex Community College, and also we have President Clea Andriadis from Urban College, although not of the community college system, but is of the ethos of the community college. And all of us most of us who are immigrant to this country start like this. I came to the country when I was 11, when I was a little girl from Hong Kong, right? How many of you have done that as immigrants? And I think that kind of background, that kind of mental preparation for us to introduce ourselves speaks of two things. One, that we are constantly the other, and the other is the possibility. I don't think it's an accident that Cloncaril Community College's tagline is "Imagine the Possibilities." Mm-hmm. About 3/4 of our students are either immigrant or of immigrant family. If in 1965, the Immigrant Act was not eliminated, I would have no students. I would be walking into an empty college that right now holds 16,000 students. My journey is almost, we are the poster child of the Immigration Act. I came to the States in 1971, part of that chain migration that Senator Kennedy so firmly supported. So I'm a child of history in that way. And I was part of the model minority myth. And I want to be very clear that being a model minority is a detriment to our work on immigration. I was a little Chinese girl, did well in high school. I landed in Miami and went to an inner city high school that was 70% Black, 10% Hispanic, and I was the only Chinese family. My brother, my sister, and I went to Miami Edison. And then from there, but for the grace of God, or for the grace of one good English teacher, I was able to go to Barnard and then Columbia and truly become what they call that purple cow in the field, right? That really special girl who did it. But then I thought about all of the folks that we left behind. Is it really true that only 1% of the entire country belong in selective colleges who are immigrant? I mean, it shaped the way that I see talent, and that talent is a meritocracy in the United States is not necessarily about talent in general, but the opportunity for talent to be placed. So I grew up in a very elite system educationally, but for some accidents of needing to make money in order to go to graduate school, I worked at a community college and I began telling the story of our students, right? That mom of three who was living in a shelter because she is a woman abused. And yet with 3 little toddlers, she has gone to Mass Bay Community College to make a life for herself. And the entire college basically protected her and hid her while she took her classes so that she can succeed. Or someone who came from China who worked in a Chinese restaurant during the day and then went into the automotive program. So those stories convinced me that Our selective colleges are terrific. They really are. They shape my sensibility and my values. But if I don't apply the sensibility of public good, right, of our public colleges and universities, we're not doing anything. So I hopped ship and became a
Beautiful.
community college person.
Beautiful, Pam. We'll come back to so many of the themes. Javier, welcome. Bienvenido al Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's wonderful to have you as our incoming chancellor.
Well, thank you very much, Marcelo, and thank you, everyone. Thank you for the warm welcome, Miriam. I'm excited, and I keep pinching myself just being in this room again, knowing that I'll have more and more opportunities to interact with all of you in my new position. I'm looking forward to meeting you all. But I would say when it comes to immigration, my story is a little bit different. I did come to the U.S. in '98 to do my PhD at Texas A&M. But it was a different story because I did bring, my wife came with me. My wife has a story of hardship in Mexico that didn't allow her to finish her education, didn't allow her to have that development. But when she came to the US, we were looking for that type of opportunity for our family. Just to be received in a way very welcoming for me and my education. I'm eternally grateful for what this country has done for us. But at the same time, it was 11 years of a very interesting situation. She coming with me, not being able to be considered for a student, being able to finish her education, or being able to work because she was my dependent coming in. After five years at Texas A&M, moving to University of Arkansas, saying, okay, now I'll have the ability to work and get a work permit for myself, and then the university would then hopefully sponsor that one for my spouse. Just to be told at that time that no, that was not going to be the case until I got tenured, that then they would support the residence for my spouse. By the time I got tenure, and I would say I got tenure because I had her by my side, to be completely honest. I don't think I would have made it without her. It was interesting. We were in the U.S. now by almost 11 years. We had 2 children born in the U.S., and yet she could still not work or engage in any activity of that. I know the talent that she has and that how productive she could have been. She was productive in many other ways, I'll tell you that. Again, I would not be where I stand today if it wasn't for the great team that we formed. Being able to be with the kids and being able to have the ability to have her stay with our kids. Thank God we had the ability and the means to support our family. But that's one aspect that I bring to myself with me every day, every morning. Is there's stories like mine and Maritza's, that you have incredible abilities and incredible capabilities, energy, desire, yet you can have that opportunity that we know exists. So being able to address that is important, keeping an eye on it. And the reason she engages now a lot with the university, even when our kids were growing up, engaging with their schools as a volunteer, was to really continue to live through those children and those that supporting others, but also developing herself. She looks forward now being in Amherst to engage in that. And I tell you that she's a voice every day in my dinner table, talking about what students need, what immigrants need, what family and non-traditional students need. So that's always the voice of conscience that I have. But it's a different immigrant story. One, I think that it's of incredible success, like Pam's, but it has a different twist in our coming to the U.S.
Thank you, Javier. There is a beautiful line by the Spanish poet Antonio Machado. No hay camino, se hace camino al andar. There is no path, we make our path. Esther, wonderful to see you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and to join colleagues here. It's interesting. I think this is one of the few panels where we're starting with our personal story as immigrants. It doesn't happen that often that we're asked to speak of our personal experience. And it's what really grounds us. It's what really gives us the empathy, the passion, the fire for the work that we do. So it's great to start this way. I actually came to the United States twice. And at World Education Services, we work with immigrants, refugees, and international students. And I have to say, I've had the experience of all three, especially having come from Sri Lanka, which was impacted by a 30-year civil war. The first time I came to the United States was in Austin, Texas, and I was a first grader. And my parents dropped me off at school, and I knew not a word of English. So I had to learn English, and I was fluent pretty quickly. We then went back to back to Sri Lanka, my country of birth, and I spoke English with a very thick Texan accent. Even the English speakers in Sri Lanka did not believe that I was speaking English. I then came back in 1982, which I consider kind of my immigrant moment. And that was a moment when the country was in the middle of a start of a civil war, which would go on to take the lives of thousands of people. My family, who stayed behind, the villages of family, were deeply impacted. And I remember my moment of obligation was when the airplane was 30,000 feet in the air. I did not think we would get on that plane. I thought that we'd be killed before we got to the airport, before we got to the gate, before we took off. So my moment of obligation for the career that followed was in that airplane when we were at 30,000 feet, and you know that sound goes off saying you can remove your seatbelt. Still to this day, and I'm on an airplane every 4 days, when I hear that sound, I'm reminded of my responsibility for paying it forward. And I've been incredibly blessed every day to do the work that I do, to have gained the education that I've gained, to have had a career in public, private, and nonprofit sectors. And in my last chapter, before joining WES, I was working in Africa, in South Africa, running the leading private higher education institution in that country and one of the top ranked universities on the African continent. And every day I was with 4,000 students, African students from every country on the continent. Those who lead higher education institutions know the remarkable feeling of being on a campus with that many students. And our students were 50% first in family with unlimited potential. And I was reminded every day of what my responsibility was. And that was to unlock opportunity, to unlock possibility, and to level the playing field. And as leader of that institution, it was my responsibility to make sure that opportunity was equal for those who are coming and paying full tuition, but my responsibility was even more to those who were there for the first time, representing their families. Now, I ended up in those 4 years graduating about 10,000 students, and I'm getting to watch them all over the continent of Africa, all over the world. And I visit them as I travel around the country. I see them at Oxford. I see them everywhere. And it's remarkable what the first in family are achieving. So I'm grounded by that, and great to speak about this today.
Thank you, Esther. So given your role as the CEO of World Education Services, you started us down a path. When you think about immigration, we're in this extraordinary hall. We think about immigration and higher education historically, that is, diachronically, and we ask, well, how is what we're seeing today both like and unlike what we've seen in prior turning points in history? We can also ask the synchronic question, the comparative question of how what is unfolding in Boston, in Amherst, in Chicago, in New York, in LA, different from the comparative perspective, what's going on in other high and middle income countries in the world. Esther, talk a little bit about what you're seeing today and how is, I suspect, quite different from what we've seen a generation ago, maybe 30 years ago. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, this moment is so unique. I didn't plan this, but I've ended up finding myself on 5 continents in the first quarter of this year, and just it's given me a lot of moments of reflection, from India to England to New Zealand to Australia and many other convenings. What is on my mind is the instability in the world, the erosion of democratic principles and institutions, and I see that everywhere that I go. And we as leaders in education have a huge role to play. Without education, there isn't stability. There aren't stable societies and countries. So that is what's so on my mind these days. And as I look across the immigrant, refugee, and international student population, people are on the move. There are today 280 million migrants. Of those, about 50 million are in the US. Last year, for the first time, our world passed a milestone I wish we didn't pass, and that was 100 million refugees, including displaced people. We've never reached that number before. Interestingly, the United States accepted about 25,000 of those refugees only. And there's 6 million international students. So if you add up those numbers, there are about 400 million people who are in places other than the countries where they were born. So if you think about the US population plus another 70 million, that's the number of people who are in places other than where they were born. I work every day with my colleagues on the challenges faced by immigrants in the country. And there are about 2.5 million people with educational credentials who are underemployed or unemployed. I see my colleague Paul Feltman, who has 20 years plus of being dedicated to this issue. Ava, another close partner. And we've been dedicated to making sure that we can find pathways and reduce barriers for those individuals plus more, many immigrants who may not have academic credentials, but they're full of possibilities as well in their lives and work. And we need to continue to find opportunities for all of those individuals. Refugees. I'm heartened to know that we have initiatives like Every Campus a Refuge, which about only 12 campuses have. It's campuses sponsoring refugees on their campuses and helping integrate them. I'm Pleased to see the Welcome Corps now making it possible for individuals and families to sponsor refugees. Hopefully soon institutions can do the same. In-state tuition is something we have to continue to advocate for refugees. And let me briefly also talk about international students. Pre-pandemic, there were about 5 million international students, about 1 million of them in the US. We are now at about 6.3 million international students worldwide. And Holon IQ has done some forecasting. By 2030, the current market of 196 billion, which is what the international student market is today, is expected to become a 430 billion market. The upside of the numbers will reach potentially 9 billion. The big four for international students are the US, UK, Australia, and Canada, and they take in about 80% of that revenue. Things are shifting though. Talent is leaving the US. Since 2017, in 5 years, 45,000 people who graduated from US institutions went to Canada. We educated them, many of them with STEM degrees, and Canada offered express entry, a pathway to permanent residency. We're losing that talent. Global South institutions are building up their infrastructure and capacity to retain students from their country and to attract international students in the region. We're losing out. There's an upside of 9 million students, but if we don't think carefully about more efficient visa processing, if we don't think more competitively about post-graduation work opportunities and pathways to immigration, we're going to miss people. More and more European countries are teaching in English at a lower cost. And Netherlands has recently introduced 8 years of tax benefits for international students who graduate and choose to stay there. So it is a different moment. And we have an opportunity to seize this moment. And I have to say, international students are unaware of community colleges also. We have work to do there in getting the word out about community colleges as an opportunity. So there's a lot of possibility, there's a lot of talent. I'm afraid we're losing out, but all of us and those listening virtually, we can play a big part in attracting talent, developing talent, and unlocking possibility for so many.
Brilliant, Esther. Thank you. You've given us so much to think and to reflect upon. Thank you. We're in a cognitive era where the search for talent and the competition for talent will be increasingly fierce. And particularly note the net waste that flows from educating brilliant, talented, international foreign students in our colleges, in our universities, and then we send them up north. There's so much lost possibility and potential there. Thank you also for reminding us. We now are in an ever more miniaturized, interconnected, and fragile world. And in many fundamental ways, we see a movement in the movement of peoples. Pam talked about her journey marked by, of course, what Senator Kennedy was an architect of, family reunification. If we think about 4 fundamental chapters in the history of immigration over the last century, we move from labor migration. It's actually the labor recruiting programs, what we used to call guest worker programs, that generated the largest flow of immigration in the history of the United States. That was the Bracero program between the United States and Mexico, and the Europeans, the Dutch, the Germans, of course, had their own program. So there is, if that's a defining chapter, the labor migration, we can say labor migration begat family reunification, which begat the rise of the second generation as a kind of a defining moment in the transformations in immigration in our country and in many, many other high-income countries in the world. I think we're entering a new phase now. We're entering a phase where, as you noted, immigration is increasingly driven by really catastrophic forces. We have unchecked climate change, war and terror, and weak states with very weak institutions are now maybe the most significant driver of mass migration. It's a landscape that is changing. In our own country, of course, we're struggling with connecting with and easing the transition of such significant numbers of young people who grow up in our country, who are part of the family of the nation, who are part of the narrative of the American story, but they don't have a paper. These are our students that don't have DACA protections. Pam, talk a little bit about that. You referred to that.
Well, you know, our DACA students, those who are ready to apply for DACA, but couldn't quite do it yet, those who are undocumented, those who are on TPS. So there are a number of visas that that keeps our students from advancing, because we don't fund those students. We subsidize all types of different tuitions for our citizens, our permanent residents. But those are not some of them, and our international students either, because I can tell you, my international students are not sons and daughters of diplomats. They are that one child at a village where everybody collected money to send he or her or they to this country. Either they can advance here or they go back home to make home better, right? You had referred to it earlier. So the kind of services that we needed to provide to not let that talent leak is huge. Very recently, we had a wonderful donor, actually, who donated funds for us to establish a director of immigrant services. And folks looked around and said, well, what would that person do? And I said, name it. It's, it's right.
All of the above.
All of the above, you know, including anything that's basic needs, anything that's legally oriented to navigate the crazy system that we've wrapped around all of our immigrants, whatever status that they're in. But I think the key piece for this particular office at this point is to convince our lawmakers, municipally, in the state, federally, that if we let this layer of talent go, we're fighting against ourselves. We're at 3.4% unemployment. In the history of our nation, employment is filled by immigrants or young people coming out of high school. We're facing a demographic cliff, getting 25% less high school graduates. So if you no high school graduates, not enough college graduates, and you sideline the immigrants with the rhetoric that we're using now, where are you going to get those workers? So ultimately, it's not only that we're decimating families and opportunities, we're putting our own economy at risk. And that ought to be bipartisan. And folks need to see that we're capping our own knees. So I think positions at colleges like immigrant services are key. Advocacy at the state level, at least for Massachusetts, for there to be in-state tuition for all visa types, I think is critical. We have 600 international students on my campus, and I hope that they will be able to take advantage of whatever it is that we offer. One more thing is that we do have immigrants now in our country, many holding professional licenses. Every cab driver that I've seen in Charlestown over the last 4 years would tell me stories. I was a doctor in my home country. I was a nurse. I was an accountant. We're driving cabs. What are we doing? What are we doing in this country? Letting that talent leak. So there's one program called the Welcome Back Center for Foreignly Trained Nurses that we have at Bunker Hill. And it's also in San Francisco and a number of other states, where we acknowledge that folks hold foreign licenses of professions that we need, right? We say we need nurses, there they are. And we do sort of remediation in language acquisition in preparation for board exams. And over the last 10 years, we put 1,000 nurses into the field. And there are about 450 in the pipeline. I urge all of you who have the opportunity to think about what is it at your college that you can provide? What are 1 or 2 or 3 of the things that will actually make a difference on the ground? And then think about the policy piece, right? That will ease this kind of, I don't know, to lower the rhetoric of anti-immigration and really acknowledge that our employers and our business and industry need immigrants.
Thank you, Pam. You went to the heart of a matter that is so puzzling. Here we are, a country where immigration is such a defining piece of the American narrative. Yet, often, the topic of immigration gets captured by the reptilian brain, not the neocortex, not the better angels of our nature. And this is something I wrestle with. I think we love immigrants looking backwards, but in the here and now, there's always such ambivalence. This was true when Benjamin Franklin, not far from this venue, articulated radioactive anxieties about the Germans are never going to learn English. They're going to Germanize them. Germanize us. We're never going to. Yet the story looks so different today, looking back. But Javier, I want to turn to you. You're the chancellor of the Anchor Institution in the other great city of immigration, Chicago. In fact, I'll be careful, and Mary Waters will correct me here. The field of American sociology grew out of, in some ways, the University of Chicago sociologists trying to understand immigration and how it was such a powerful algorithm in the building of that city. Mary, did I get it wrong? Talk about what you see in Chicago in these issues, the complexities. Yeah. Immigrants are many things. Some of us are undocumented, some of us are documented, some of us came seeking shelter, some of us came looking for opportunity. We have a wonderful book. Talk about what you see at University of Illinois at Chicago, and how you're thinking about your migration, if I can put it this way, to Western Massachusetts.
Well, I mean, it's having been in Chicago, I think has been an incredible learning experience because, as you know and you mentioned, is one of a city that has a history of immigration, a city that even in its geography and its distribution, it's different sets of histories. You're gonna have the Greek town, you're gonna have Italian village, you're gonna have the Polish, you're gonna have the Mexicans that have there, you have the Puerto Ricans. There is a different set of population, but in each and one of those areas and demographics, you'll see perhaps a history of the opportunity and a history of when they came and when they were part of the immigration wave into the US, where you see perhaps the Irish community, the Italian community, they were immigrants themselves, but they don't necessarily see the same way as their immigration as it's now happening perhaps with the Mexican and the Puerto Rican, and now coming from Syria, coming from Ukraine, that the ones that you're seeing recently as refugees. So you see a history of how the city was built in different waves of immigration and how the different resources and available programs have made a difference, and not only in those communities, but I would say in the production and the capabilities of the city and the state of Illinois in general. When you empower and educated and provided working permits to those early immigrants, they became what they are today. One of the most developed cities, beautiful art, beautiful architecture, great education. When now you're providing when the immigration of Mexicans and Puerto Ricans into the area, you could see that there was some education, but not all of them. And the more recent waves are post-DACA that are seeing a huge, huge constraint in their development. And I see it every day, how that is reducing the capabilities, that's reducing the production or the capacity of the city, the capacity of the state to build on itself and its future. So it's like seeing idle capacity and just the inventory just building and not being utilized, and credentialing and abilities really becoming going to waste. It's for lack of a better term. So what I see in Chicago, it's what I have to go back to the story of my wife in Texas. When I went to Texas A&M, there was one thing that Texas A&M had in coordination with the Barbara Bush Center, and it was providing English classes. And it was populated by a lot of spouses, a lot of sons and daughters of students that were at A&M coming from international, from other countries. And the English was a barrier that it's the first one that many immigrants face. And it was removed. She speaks English because of that program. So what I want to see more, and I know that in UIC is happening, and I know that in Amherst we want to do that, and they're doing this as in your school, Pam, is I think instead of just continue to just show how the negative is, can we start helping these individuals with programs? Like if you're a nurse, how can we get your credentials to be at? If the English is a barrier, how can we get? I think back when I was a student at A&M, perhaps the dimensionality of the problem was simpler. The waves of immigration were more, I would say, for lack of a better term, more selective, in the sense that it was not so much related to war, it was not so much related to terror, it was more related to perhaps education and employment in the fields. It was well defined. Now it's coming from so many different angles. And it's just hard to say, well, if you do it for refugees, why are you not doing it for these programs? If you do it for the students, why are you not doing it for those students that are being brought by their parents? So the dimensionality has increased. But the barriers, I think, continue to be the same. It's language, it's being able to feel a sense of belonging, a welcoming environment, one that opens doors for economic opportunity. Most people that immigrate in the US and out of any of their countries into any country, they're doing it because, what you said, Marcelo, they're looking for an opportunity. And instead of letting them leverage that energy that they bring and be of benefit to society, any society they're joining, we're putting them down. And that is just creating a bigger problem, a bigger economic problem in any country. Now you have a certain part of the population that it's just sitting on their hands and not being able to do anything. So to me, that's the best thing that I think we could do that I've seen in Chicago that I would like, and I know that in Amherst and UMass, we have it in many institutions, services to support that transition.
Thank you. Thank you, Javier. I'm glad you named the issue of language because that's such a defining issue in the immigrant journey. Pam talked eloquently about that as well. There's a lot of misunderstanding and some misinformation. Immigrants today are gravitating towards the English language at a rate that is maybe never seen before in previous waves of immigration. Immigrants want to learn English, immigrants are learning English, and but the world has changed. I think it was, in fact, Mary's advisor in graduate school, and then her colleague at Harvard, who announced famously, the US is a cemetery for languages. Germans brought German, the Japanese brought Japanese, the Italians brought Italian to the North End and to Red Hook and to Brooklyn, to Chicago, and all of those languages perish. And that's a disaster. Again, if we think of possibility as the word that unites our two domains this morning. So we need to also celebrate, nurture the extraordinary cognitive capital that comes and that lives in immigrant languages. In a world that is ever more miniaturized, speaking more than one language is an enormous advantage. Cognitive neuroscience has changed the entire framework of understanding. Multilinguals and brain imaging has changed the entire conversation. Multilinguals, bilinguals, have something very special in the so-called executive function, which is this is the crown, it's a jewel in the crown of the higher cognitive skills that are so uniquely human. Multilinguals excel in their executive function. We need to do both. We need to offer all of the pathways to support literacy and to support the acquisition of the English language. And we need to do a much better job to do away with being a cemetery for languages. Can you comment on what you're seeing in terms of language and identity in the new waves, the folks you're working with?
Yeah, this certainly comes up in all of the programs that we run. We have an initiative called the Skilled Immigrant Integration Program, and English language certainly comes up as one of the significant barriers. But there are other barriers that also come up, and that includes often access to professional networks. Immigrants, even after they have completed their higher education, or if they're coming with academic qualifications, they simply lack the professional networks. And I can say for myself, that was the case when I completed university and graduate school. So access to professional networks is something that comes up as well. And we also work in Canada. In Canada, a lot of the immigrants we work with said that another barrier is employers asking for in-country experience. So here's someone who's found themselves in the country or just completed their education and trying to get access to their first opportunity, and they're being asked for US experience or Canadian experience, and that often is a barrier as well. Earlier, we had a comment about licensing, and this is something we do a lot of work around. Paul Feltman and many of my colleagues work with the Welcome Back Centers, the offices of New Americans, many other existing initiatives. And all of those initiatives are focused on making sure that those who come from regulated professions can take the experience, can take the credentials that they earned in other countries and transition to work in the US. We were fortunate at the end of last year, working in a really important set of partnerships to pass the Bridging the Gap for New Americans Act last September, October 2022. And that happened in partnership with about 200 organizations. And that was the first time the US Congress has looked at barriers that immigrants with academic credentials face, and the bill, which passed with bipartisan support, again, because of the partnerships. This bill has now directed the Department of Labor to look very specifically at barriers faced by immigrants. I'm sure the topic of English language will come up, but licensing will come up as well. Professional networks will come up. And we expect to have a set of recommendations from the Department of Labor, which hopefully in partnership we can make sure to implement in the coming years.
Terrific, thank you. We have a question from our audience online, and I was wondering, Nestor, if you could comment on this. We're all seeing that India will now surpass China as the world's most populous democracy. It's a pluri-democratic society. It's the most populous democracy in the world. Concurrently, we see a shift. We see growing numbers of Indian origin students coming as international students. Talk a little bit about that and how you see the relative decline of China as a source of international students, both in our country, but also what you're seeing comparatively in Canada, in the UK. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, colleagues and I have been focused on both India and China quite a bit. The story post-pandemic on China is yet to be written as far as international students. China, with now 99 institutions in the country that are highly ranked on international rankings, became a destination country over the past 10 years, attracting so many students from the region, from Africa and elsewhere. But these students, obviously, you've read the news, and they found themselves locked out during the pandemic. They had a hard time transferring and continuing their education. Many have found a way to continue elsewhere. And so it's yet to be seen how China as a destination country will evolve post-pandemic. In terms of outgoing students, recently, again, you would have seen the news of the Chinese government saying if you are studying with an overseas institution, you can no longer continue studying in China. You need to go to the country of the institution. So that is happening. In terms of outgoing Chinese students, we're still seeing an outflow, particularly of Chinese graduate students. But I will be watching what happens in terms of China and international and transnational education. India, fascinating. I'm spending a lot of time in India because a third of the people who come to us for credential evaluation are from India. And there was a huge outflow of international students from India, but India has a new national education policy, 2020, first time that they've had a national education policy since 1986. They're opening up, and foreign branch campuses are now allowed. Private investment in education is now allowed. There's a new initiative in Gujarat called the Gift City, which is a geography where you can go set up a campus. There are tax benefits and technology incentives, so campuses are engaged there. India also has a plan to attract 1 million international students. They now have about 66 institutions that are highly ranked. They're not quite ready to address, I think, student experience for international students, but India is poised, I think, in the next decade to potentially become a significant source market. So destination countries for international students in the past decades will now come source countries, and India will be at the top of that list. It's going to be really interesting to watch. I think there will be a study in India push under Modi, which I will be following closely. But the outgoing students are still on the rise. And it's a country that's not restricting the outflow, and it's going to incentivize and invest in the inflow into their own country. So I was there the month that India became the most populous nation in the world. And it was also the month that India became the top 5 economy in the world, 5th largest economy in the world,
Surpassing the
replacing
United Kingdom.
United Kingdom, the colonial country. India is the country to watch for me over the coming decade.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on to another topic, but Esra, I'll come back to you. We have a war in Europe, and maybe if you can think about how what we're seeing in Ukraine, the plight of the overseas students, the foreign students in the Ukraine, and the impact of the massive displacement. But I want to move on to the demographic elephant in the room. I mean, the numbers that, the chart that we have here that Carola put together with Miriam and our colleagues at the Migration Policy Institute are stunning. 31% of all students enrolled in higher education are immigrant origin. 88% of Asian college students are immigrant origin. 68% of Latina college students are immigrant origin. 28% of Black students are immigrant origin. 10% of white students are immigrant origin. Javier, Pam, what are we doing and what do we need to do to address this just geologic change unfolding in every campus in our country? What are we doing? How can we do better facilitating their integration, their thriving, their flourishing?
Well, I think the words on the campus that have started to emerge more and more is how do you create that sense of belonging? How do you create that sense of being welcome? But I would say that there's one more word that we need to add, and you talk about the intersectionality yesterday and today. This is a cultural experience that we can create in our campuses, that if we embrace it and if we really, really create that sense of collaboration, exploration, trying to showcase the very best of the culture that you bring forward with you, with your heritage, can create a completely different perspective of how this country can emerge or move forward in the next 2-3 decades with a leadership that is immersed and understands and applauds multicultural experiences that are not necessarily other countries' cultures. These are cultures of the US, of US citizens. One of the numbers that Marcelo, you were mentioning, although 88% of Asian college students are immigrant origin, 51% of those are already second generation. For the Latino, is 50% of our second generation already. So these are already US born. So we have to start to understand that this is part of the culture, just like Irish, Italian, Polish, we're part of the culture of the US, are part of the culture of the US right now. So to me, that's what we need to start to understand. These are not foreigners only anymore. These are US citizens. We are US citizens, and our cultures, if embraced, will make the US the continuum of that experiment to be the successful democracy that embraces and gives opportunities. And because of it, transforms itself every wave of immigration that comes to this country.
Pam, I'll turn it to you.
So I think we need to be intentional and mindful about the language we use in assisting immigrant students. We need to stop using the language of rescue. Mm-hmm. Immigrants don't need rescuing. We need to begin thinking about language that are not deficit, but of assets. And frankly, being an immigrant myself and having gone through that journey, there is a big difference between being comfortable in a space and belonging in a space. Mm-hmm. Many times I feel comfortable. Still, after 50 years of embracing my country, there are times that I do not feel belong. Where I feel belonging is when folks understand that that there is value in every culture, and it's being integrated right into the American society at large. I mean, I always laugh when I give this example, but my mom, who came when she was 30 and raising 3 children, she would make spaghetti bolognese for us, but she would put soy sauce in it.
I have to try that, Pam.
And, my friends would come over and they say, you make the best bolognese, better than the Italians do. And I'm like, well, but it's a silly example, but it's really the way that we integrate. I mean, think about your Thanksgiving meals. How many of you serve foods of ethnic origin with every Thanksgiving meal? It's not just the turkey and the stuffing, right? So I won't tell you what we serve. We serve really strange things, combinations of things, because my family has Latinx roots. So I have Chinese, I have Latinx, we have German, we have, all these different things. And that to me is the essential immigrant experience. So how do we translate that into the educational institutions? And frankly, I think the educational institutions is where language goes to die. So how do we preserve, right, that cultural wealth, that and to sort of switch our minds around? We're not rescuing people. We are harnessing talent from other countries to enrich our own. I think we need to be selfish about our language and protective over folks who've chosen us. It's not the other way around. I mean, we don't necessarily get to choose other people, but folks have chosen us. And to see that as an honor and not as a problem.
So important, Pam, when a third of all Nobel Prize winners in the sciences since the turn of the century are immigrant origin, immigrants don't need rescue. The kinetic energy, the ganas, the grit it takes for immigrants to come to our country today reminds me of what the great Barbara Jordan once said about immigrants. They remind us of what it is to be American. So thank you. On food, I can't let that pass.
And tacos, I hate to tell you, there's soy sauce in my tacos.
Yeah, Carol and I hosted a Somali student who lived with us for a number of years, and we ended up creating Somali burritos. And he's very proud of that, and he now has a big post in Sweden, and he puts on Facebook his new versions. Immigrants do two things when they arrive in a new setting. First, it's a naming. New Amsterdam, New York, New Mexico. Then they open restaurants.
That's right.
And today, we eat better, we dress better, we definitely dance better because of the immigrant energy we have been able to harness. We have a unique opportunity. We have leadership here from the federal government. We have representatives from our two extraordinary senators in the Commonwealth. What do you need from them for your campuses to do better now and moving forward? You have a unique opportunity. Here they are.
I'll start because I really need the money. No. For our congressional delegation has been amazing in helping us incorporate all of those strengths of our immigrant populations through education into society. So I certainly thank Senator Markey's office and Senator Warren's office in being able to do that. For our state delegation, we need to pass the law for allowing for in-state tuition for all visa types. And I'm looking at my colleagues, President Lane Glenn, who has spearheaded this particular ask and initiative for a long time. It would drive the economy of the Commonwealth in a way that will make it healthy. So just one ask, that.
I would say one of definitely the in-state, the resident tuition is a most, is the first step. I would say the other one is part of the number of immigrants are still first generation, meaning they face the same challenges and perhaps sometimes bigger on working through all the maze that it's to get into higher education and to apply for your FAFSA and to have all your records. And I'm considering myself an educated person, and as I was going to bring my two kids to college, I'm not first generation college per se, but I'm first generation college in the US. right? And navigating all that aspect is a challenge. So providing more support. AI is great. It's not the best when you're trying to do a frequently asked questions on the phone. You want to talk to a person. You want to be able to get that through. And I would say the other part that I would like us to get some support from federal and state government is with understanding that what you just said, we're educating a number of people that are leaving the US, are leaving the Commonwealth, are leaving Illinois. There's a book called Sludge that Provost Sirio has asked me to read, and I read it. And sometimes resources come by reducing some of the red tape. Sometimes it's not about just the financial support, but can you help us see what in this day and age we really need to check for and do, and to be able to get employment and move those students into the productive lives that I know they can have here in the Commonwealth, here in the US, and continue to drive our economy.
Yeah, I'll also lift up the in-state tuition for refugees. That will certainly be a game changer. I'm just seeing the rules changing in other countries around the world where they are actively competing for international students. And we've got to focus on our visa system for international students. That said, the number of visa application acceptances last year in the US was one of the highest levels. So also acknowledging incredible progress, over 400,000 visa acceptances. However, many of those individuals may end up not choosing to enroll here because they're going to be looking at what are my post-graduation work opportunities. I'm going to choose the country that has a 3-year opportunity. Australia, I think, has now a potential 3-year post-graduation work opportunity. So you get a visa in the US, but you have enrollment options elsewhere. So it's not just the visa piece, it's the post-graduation work opportunity, the OPT, the CPT, those are going to be so important. And I've spoken about the international student market, but that market is really the people who can afford it. There are many more, thousands, probably millions, who are best of the best and the brightest. How do we present the US as an opportunity for some of the brightest that may not be coming from the most capacity from a financial perspective? So I think about that group as well. And finally, I would highlight again those who are in the country and unable to access the professions that they should be in, and the recommendations that will come from the Department of Labor as a result of the Bridging the Gap for New Americans Act. I would ask for help in implementing those recommendations, which will be so important for those already in the country, already having completed their education and training with experience, but facing barriers to be doing the work they're doing. So there are so many things to do. What gives me hope is the partnerships. Miriam, what you're doing, Ava, what you do every day, Paul, and so many others. The 500 institutions in the President's Alliance, that happened very quickly. And the potential of the President's Alliance, the Imprint Coalition, these partnerships together with government will make all the difference in the world.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Goya, we've come to the end. Goya, Pam, not the food people, the painting people.
I'm thinking burritos.
Goya has a breathtaking portrait hanging in the Prado. Kronos eats its children. Time eats us all. We've come to the end of time. I am so grateful for this extraordinary conversation. And let's keep working on this word that unites our two domains: education, higher education, and immigration. Possibility. Let's make the most of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I am honored to introduce our second panel on overcoming barriers to citizenship and immigrant inclusion and our next set of panelists. Dr. Carola Suarez Orozco, Director of the Immigration Initiative at Harvard and Professor in Residence at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, is serving as our moderator. Carola is nationally recognized for her groundbreaking work on how immigration experiences have impacted the development of children, adolescents, and young adults, and for which she has won numerous awards. Carola will be joined by an outstanding mix of experts, advocates, and leaders. Dr. Mary Waters is a long-renowned immigration scholar and is the John Loeb Professor of Sociology and the PVK Professor of Arts and Sciences at Harvard University. Eva Malona is Chief of the Office of Citizenship, Partnership, and Engagement, OCPE, at the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services in the Department of Homeland Security. Patricia Salvavaro is the Executive Director of Agencia Alpha, a grassroots nonprofit and social ministry of Congregation Lion of Judah. Nancy Palencia Ramirez is a graduate student at Harvard Graduate School of Education. Mary chaired the oft-cited and important National Academy of Sciences panel on the integration of immigrants into American society. I don't think there is an immigration scholar in the US who has not cited Mary Waters. Ava is a longtime national immigration advocate, and prior to joining DHS, she was the president and chief executive of the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition, MIRA, which is a nationally known immigration coalition in Massachusetts. Patricia has led Agencia Alpha for over 20 years, which empowers over 1,200 immigrants annually through their accredited legalization and citizenship and leadership programs. She's currently a member of the Governor Maura Healey's Latino Empowerment Council and has served on the advisory board for the City of Boston Mayors for Immigrant Advancement. Nancy's research focuses on using product management and iterative design for providing quality civic education to early primary school children. And she's now working on a project about working with children about the experiences of the deportation of their parents, and she may say more about that. She was a Chevening Scholar and holds an MA in International Political Economy from King's College London. And with that, I am thrilled and honored to welcome Carola and all the panelists up to the front of the room. Thank you.
What an honor and a pleasure to be joined by this extraordinary panel. And I want to thank all of you who have been involved in organizing this, and thank you for joining us. For the past 3 decades, immigrant origin students have been the fastest growing group of children in our K through 12 schools. And now we are seeing the astounding impacts of that growth in higher education when we learn the astounding number of 31% of students in higher education being of immigrant origin. That's a number, I've been in this field for 30 years, that number blew me out of the water. And I think that most folks in higher education simply don't have that figure anywhere close to their imaginary. In this panel, we will turn to the significance of these students for the project of immigrant inclusion and citizenship building. I will start by asking each panelist to respond to a specific set of questions that will frame their own perspective and lens that they bring to this panel, and then we'll launch into a conversation and discussion about some of the current barriers to full inclusion for certain immigrant populations, and as well as changes that we would hope could improve higher education's role as a crucial pathway for these young people. But before I do that, I'd like all of us to share with the audience what brought you to this work. I'm taking a page from the last panel. What brought you to this work? I'm happy to share very quickly. I was an immigrant child, immigrated when I was 5, entered American schools in the 60s when there wasn't really much of an imaginary in schools about how to address those kids. And then I became a school psychologist and a clinical psychologist, spoke Spanish, and found that none of my training prepared me to do the work in a culturally relevant, culturally responsible kind of way. And that just launched me on a pathway of trying to learn more about the immigrant child experience so that I could help inform the field. And then because I work in higher education, I've worked with extraordinary students, mostly from immigrant origins, and then have become aware of many, not only their extraordinary strengths, but many of the barriers that are in their way that I've tried to name and work towards alleviating. So that's my story. Eva?
Good morning. It is a privilege to be with you today and be part of this distinguished panel. I just wanted to thank the Kennedy Institute for hosting us, our Harvard Initiative, President's Alliance. Miriam, thank you so much for your leadership. Harvard Graduate School of Education. It is also meaningful to me personally being in this extraordinary venue that has the legacy of the lion in the Senate, the late Senator Kennedy, who I had the privilege of a lifetime to work on so many issues on immigration bills and healthcare. And this building, by the way, the architect of this building, Rafael Vinelli, it's an immigrant from Uruguay. So I know this from the chancellor, so thank you. So it is personal to me, and as you can tell, I have an accent. English, it's my 4th language. I walked the journey as an international student to adjusting status, to becoming a naturalized citizen, which is the best title I hold. And immigrant integration, it's near and dear to my heart. I spent 20 years of my career working with stakeholders to promote immigrant integration as a two-way process, one by which newcomers, new Americans work hard to adjust, to integrate civically and linguistically and economically and socially, and also the receiving society and the stakeholders, government and all, provide the path for them to integrate. And I am a believer that an investment in immigrant integration, it's an investment in our country. What we do today, how we act today, will really face the future. So I have the privilege of serving under this administration a naturalized citizen, a citizen by choice, having a privilege of a lifetime to be part of this administration. So that's what brings me to this work. Thank you.
so much, Eva. Mary?
So yes, thank you for including me in this important gathering. I've learned a lot already today. And like Ted Kennedy, I am from a large Irish Catholic family. I have 7 younger brothers and sisters. And all 4 of my grandparents were immigrants from Ireland. And unlike Senator Kennedy, my family was not at all wealthy. In fact, they were quite poor. My grandmother was a maid all of her life and had a 2nd grade education. And so I have experienced in my life the promise that of immigration that my brothers and sisters and I have really lived and taken advantage of opportunities that my grandmother, all of my grandparents sacrificed a great deal to give to us. And that's why I study what I study.
Thank you, Mary. Nancy?
Right. Well, it's difficult to follow that up, but I'll just start with my earliest childhood memory, or one of my earliest childhood memories. I remember sitting in kindergarten and I was like really clutching this crayon and like working on writing my name and the names of my parents and my family members, because I like convinced myself that if I did this, then I would be filling out Social Security cards because we were undocumented. And that played a big part of my life. And I mean, now I have, hopefully soon 2 master's degrees. And I think what like the trajectory of that is, I'm motivated to work with kids and immigration in particular because I know I'm not exceptional in any way. I was very fortunate, and when I got any opportunity at all, I clutched to it as hard as I could. But I know that I was given opportunities that other people weren't. And my motivation and drive is to just open the door for kids and young kids, because that's my choice, or like where I want to focus my passion point. Thank you. And I just know that giving them, just starting them off, giving them a sense of self will propel them, because I know it's worked for me. And as an unremarkable person, I just know that you can, if you give someone an opportunity, they will take it, especially immigrants who are so strong and motivated.
Thank you, Nancy. And you are remarkable as in your unremarkableness. Thank you so much for everything you do. Patricia?
Good morning, everybody. I want to echo what Eva said in expressing my most sincere gratitude to all the organizers. I am beyond excited to be here. I think what got me into this line of work is because my story is the typical immigrant story, right? My mom came here. I migrated when I was 11. I grew up listening to her stories, how she had to cross the border. She was undocumented. When there was an earthquake in Guatemala, she had to go back. And then she had to come back because she already had, another family unit here. So I grew up listening to these like hardship stories, but I was blessed. Although I came undocumented, I'm a recipient of the, Reagan Amnesty Program. I got a full ride to Boston University. I did a double major in economics, international relations. I worked for a very excellent money management company for 17 years. So I was living the life. But I will never forget the one day that I'm at the cafeteria and this young man from El Salvador is, all of a sudden, he's very flustered and he's having a hard time with this woman. And this young lady is accusing him of horrible things. This poor guy was barely speaking in English. He was sent to the police station. It was just in me to follow the guy and figure out how we can help, right? So I think it was just that passion in me after listening to all the struggles that my family has gone through. And as a woman who believes in God and as a faith-based as a faith person, it was natural for my best friend Damaris and I to co-found an organization that we felt, how are we going to share God's love with people when we are inside 4 walls? So for us, practicing social justice was the right thing to do. And 21 years later, we're here and we're trying to invest or instill those values of social justice in our nieces who are here also, and I'm so proud of them. So that's just a little bit about what got me into work. I think it's that desire to do social justice, but in a way that we're not going to focus just on one aspect, on the individual, but seeing the individual for who they are, the body, the mind, the soul. So thank you.
Thank you for that. And I will say that I've been in this work for 30 years, and many times this work feels overwhelming. I call it a Sisyphusian task, because we're pushing up the stone and it keeps coming down, and then we push it back up. But one of the great honors and pleasures of this work are the extraordinary people that we get to work with, both, on the ground and the inspiring folk who are trying to do this work. So thank you for being part of this panel. So Mary, I'd like to start the conversation with you. You led the Comprehensive National Academy of Sciences study of immigrant integration. It was, really a very important piece of work. So let's just start with, how did the NAS define integration?
Okay. I would just preface it for anybody listening who doesn't know how these reports work, that the National Academy of Sciences was founded by President Lincoln to give scientific, unbiased advice on issues of national importance to the federal government, to the president, the Congress, and different divisions of the federal government. So it's very important when a report comes out from the National Academy of Sciences that it is very vetted and really objective. So they came to us saying the federal government wanted an answer to how are immigrants integrating. So we got together 17 leading social scientists. We spent a couple of years writing a 500-page report. You can download it from the National Academy of Sciences website. We defined integration. That was one of the first tasks, was to think about how immigrants change because they come here, and how Native people change because immigrants come here. So it's a two-way process. We are changing as well as immigrants are changing as we come together. And we measured it in two ways. One was for immigrants, how many years you're here and how you change. And then for generations. So are the children of immigrants more like natives, and are the grandchildren of immigrants more like natives?
Thank you. And so what did you learn?
So we measured, I think, 17 different indicators. We looked at civic participation, we looked at socioeconomic mobility, we looked at language, we looked at culture, we looked at health, crime, everything we could measure. And on every single measure, there was evidence of profound integration, that immigrants and natives were becoming more like each other. The longer immigrants are here, the more they become like other native-born Americans. And native-born Americans and our institutions are changing because immigrants come here. In most of the things that we measured, that's a good thing. So for education, for income, the kinds of occupations, we see remarkable progress. Mexican men, for instance, come with an average of less than an 8th grade education. The second generation Mexican young men have an average of 13 years. So they're an average of some college. So we see that's an amazing level of social mobility. And we see this across different groups, and it's much faster than what happened 100 years ago with European immigrants.
So the hand-wringing about they're never going to be, integrate is just misplaced, it sounds like.
It's really wrong. The force of integration in American society is quite strong. And in fact, one thing I would note, given what we talked about in the first panel, is that integration happens rapidly, and it happens the moment people arrive. And in some ways, before they come, kind of anticipatory integration, learning English before they come. But people who are young people in colleges are already becoming American. Just by living in our society, people are integrating, they're putting down roots, they're becoming American. And that's one of the tragedies, that the one way in which we are impeding people from this integration is by denying legal status to everyone. So undocumented people and their children are becoming American in all the ways that we measure. They're learning English, they're buying houses, they're working hard, they're going to church. Our churches would be very empty if there weren't immigrants in American society, and people become more religious as they come here because we're a very religious society. But we have a barrier, so people, undocumented people, are not integrating, they're only partially integrating because we put this barrier up and keep them from taking advantage of the opportunities that really people come here for.
Thank you for pointing that out. So I imagine you've seen the recent work by Rand Abramansky and Leah Boustin, who drew upon longitudinal big data to recount what they call the untold story of immigrant success in their recent book, Streets of Gold. The story of second generation ascent seems to be as true today as it was 100 years ago. What stood out to you in terms of parallels or contrasts in their work?
Yeah, so this book is by two economists who created a really impressive large data set where they linked Census Bureau data historically for parents and children 100 years ago, as well as looking at linked income and census data now for the children of immigrants. And yes, the story is very much the same as what we concluded in the National Academy's report, and what, really decades of social science research has found, which is that immigrants themselves are highly selected and work extremely hard, have very high labor force participation rates, and have very high goals for their children. And their children are exceptional. They do exceptionally well. And one of the things that Streets of Gold finds, that many other scholars have found before them, is that the second generation and then the third have remarkable social mobility. And that social mobility and that integration is happening faster now than it did 100 years ago, which is exactly the opposite of what many Americans believe, that their grandparents became American more quickly. It's not true. English language learning is still creating graveyards for other languages, and in many, many ways, immigrants are assimilating or integrating faster now than they have before.
Thank you, Mary. And one thing that's different today is the barrier of undocumented status.
That's right, which we didn't have before. My grandmother would not have gotten in on any visa that exists now. She would have been undocumented, but we didn't have that 100 years ago. And so that really is this self-inflicted wound that we're creating. I guess the one other thing I would just mention is that this two-way integration means that, and the fact that immigrants are such a large proportion of our society, means that immigrants really are us. So when we talk about how do we facilitate immigrants in our higher ed institutions, or in our occupations, or in our neighborhoods or communities, we're really talking about our society, not us and them. We're talking about how are we changing, how are we growing, and how can we be inclusive and create belonging among all Americans. And that it's easier than many people think. We just need to stop shooting ourselves in the foot.
Thank you for that. 100% agreed. There's a demographic imperative. Over a quarter of our K through 12 kids are immigrant origin are of immigrant origin, and nearly a third now in higher ed are of immigrant origin. They are us. They are an integral part of our society, and we can't play ostrich any longer. So could you tell me could tell us rather, what was the role of education in the integration process, and then speak to the role of higher education?
Yeah. Well, any of us who are parents or want to be parents know that our children are facing an economy in which getting higher education is really crucial for doing well. And so what every immigrant parent hopes for their children is what every parent does, which is that education will create the opportunity for a better life. And so higher education is really important, and it is more important than it was 100 years ago. So the shape of the economy, the kinds of jobs available to people meant that 100 years ago, people didn't necessarily need to complete high school or complete college or community college in order to have a job that supported a family. And now we have a real imperative for higher education. We have a knowledge economy. And so it's really important for the children of immigrants and for our society that we have an inclusive higher education sector.
Thank you very much, Barry. I'm going to turn now to Eva, please. Could you share with us the current goals of the Office of Citizen Partnership and Engagement for immigrant integration?
Thank you so much for the question and the opportunity. Let me start by saying that U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services is the agency that oversees the lawful immigration to the United States. And the Office of Citizenship, Partnership, and Engagement, it's the newest office that was created last fall with the critical mission to support the agency's mission to uphold America's promise as a nation of welcome, as a nation of opportunities, with fairness, integrity, and respect for all we serve. So that was the purpose of the creation of the office. And the mandate of the Office of Citizenship is to promote citizenship, to build capacity, to provide federal leadership, promote English learning and rights and responsibilities of citizenship. So that's one big part of the office. And then equally important, it's also the partnership and engagement. It is a critical mission of the agency, USCIS, but also DHS, that partnership and meaningful engagements are critical to our mission. Secretary Mayorkas often says that the Department of Homeland Security, it's the Department of Partnerships. So we cannot do this work alone. The creation of the Office of Partnership and Engagement within USCIS really intends to restore trust, to engage with stakeholders at all levels, with state and local government, with the nonprofit community, with the business community, with the higher education community, and their amazing role with the faith-based community. And partnership, it's really an illustration of how we can move forward together for a stronger future. We, as a new office, have conducted over 85 national engagements in the last fiscal year and reach out to over 100,000 stakeholders across the nation. Part of our office also are the community relations specialists who are based in the community, state, and localities, and they work very closely with the headquarters. And our mission is to really engage in meaningful ways, in dialogue with our stakeholders, and get their input, get their recommendations, get their constructive criticism as to how best we can serve our communities. And I encourage you to work with our office to reach out, because partnership and meaningful engagement is the way forward to fulfill our mission.
Without a doubt, we can't do this alone. We've heard about the reestablishment of the task force on New Americans. Can you tell us about how you see the role of higher education in this process, or what you see the role of higher education in this process in furthering your goals?
So President Biden signed an executive order to promote naturalization, to strengthen our legal immigration system and strengthen immigrant integration. As a result of that executive order, USCIS and the Office of Citizenship, Partnership, and Engagement is implementing that vision. There is an interagency task force. There are 16 federal agencies working together to reduce the barriers of naturalization and really look forward to ways of meaningful integration. And I have the privilege of chairing that working group. And in addition to that, so the long vision is working together, and the key pillar is to really work in partnership with our local state government as well as the nonprofit community. Higher education that Miriam so beautifully articulated this morning really provides a path to for international students and immigrant students to be part of our fabric. So doing this work and having this vision to reach out to 9.1 million green card holders who are eligible to naturalize. So that's one part of the integration work as in terms of the civic integration and citizenship. Also, the White House Domestic Policy Council was pleased to reconvene last December the Task Force for New Americans, that it's comprised by federal agencies, including Department of Labor, Department of Education, Department of Homeland Security, and many others, charged to really look into the big picture of make an assessment in terms of what are some of the programs and best practices that do exist that the federal government and other sectors, public and private partnerships, have done to foster immigrant integration. And based on this assessment, the task force led by DPC is charged to produce recommendations that will go to President Biden to how best can the federal government coordinate this effort and focus on 5 particular areas. One, it's the language learners and language access, the workforce development and training, the well-being of immigrants and their health, the financial education and financial access, as well as the database research. The task force is comprised by 5 committees. Each committee is led by Domestic Policy Council members, and they have been doing an extraordinary work to really assess and engage. The Office of Citizenship, Partnership, and Engagement is a principal partner in engaging the stakeholders in this conversation, making sure that they have voice in terms of, where the barriers are, where the challenges are, what are some of the promising practices, and what are some of the recommendations that will be part of that report. And I'm really proud to say that the task force and our office have engaged in 15 national engagements with a focus on the areas that I just mentioned, reached out to thousands of stakeholders who had a voice in this process. We just concluded a roundtable, the 15th yesterday, and we're looking to a 16th today. But it is really work that calls to a conversation about all of those who are lawfully present here. For several decades, part of the conversation has been who is coming to the US, how many are coming, what is a certain behavior for certain people to stay or be removed. And the task force and the mission is to really focus on those lawfully here who are part of the fabric. And it really calls to what the impact is of the population who is currently in the United States and what the impact is on cities and localities. So it's an extraordinary effort. And at a personal level, I'm super excited as someone who really walked the walk and understand the importance and also the role and the engagement of the higher education. As a former adjunct professor, I have a deeper appreciation, and as a daughter of academics, that higher education, it's a critical partner as we try to define the future of international students and immigrant students as we do this work. And I look forward to hearing more this afternoon and hearing from you as well in terms of how best can we coordinate and come up with really thoughtful ways of engaging, thoughtful ways of recruiting the talent. My colleague Esther mentioned this morning how many went to Canada, and we are making a huge investment here. There are 10 million jobs unfulfilled. And I think it's time to really work in a bipartisan way across the aisle to really come up with thoughtful solutions to retain talent and provide meaningful ways for students to have an opportunity to continue to be part of the workforce.
Thank you so very much for sharing that with us. I'm going to turn now to Patricia, please. From your vantage point as an executive director of a grassroots nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the lives of our immigrant communities through legal supports, could you tell us a little bit about barriers to naturalization and inclusion that you or groups that you are working with or you're encountering, please?
Absolutely. If we focus a little bit on the DACA recipients, for example, it's implied that there's a pathway to citizenship, but there isn't really, right? Because we all know that DACA gives you a protection from deportation and allows you to work for 2 years. So our DACA recipients for the last 10 years have been living on a thread. And if you allow me, I would like to challenge all of us tonight to go home. You put your PJs on, you go to bed, and I want you to put yourself in this predicament. What if your permission to stay in that comfortable bed all of a sudden disappears? How would you feel the next morning? So our DACA recipients live constantly with that fear, the uncertainty, I don't know how long I'm going to be able to continue to work or go to school. I'm a homeowner, but what's going to happen if all of a sudden, and we know that right now, DACA, it's on a thread right now, right? The courts at any moment could say, no, that's it. So it's a tall order to talk about DACA to citizenship because there isn't. And a lot of those recipients came through the border. So even if, in the future they were to find love or there's a way for them to access a green card, many of them would have to leave the country. And then we have to deal with all the legal issues you will need to be out of the country for 10 years. So those are the barriers, the status quo right now, the fact that they've been paying thousands of dollars. They've been vetted multiple times. They were our essential workers during the pandemic. They are our entrepreneurs. They're the ones doing amazing things, but yet we're, a small group of people is holding their lives in the palm of their hands. In any given moment, we're going to rip that away. And I don't know, I'm sure many of you know that there's a movement right now for some of these DACA recipients to self-deport. I read somewhere that it said that they feel like the US is like this golden cage. There's so many opportunities, but they're trapped. There's this, and then let's talk about the mental health issues that come with not knowing what's going to happen to you if your permit is not renewed. So yes, there are many barriers to citizenship. There isn't a pathway right now. And I so much appreciate how, this understanding of what inclusion is. Many of our DACA recipients are as American as baseball and apple pie, so the saying goes, right? But deep down, we know that there's still this feeling of, well, you're different. You're not really from here. And then they have to deal with the guilt that their parents may not get those same benefits. So, they have to deal with.
Patricia, if I may, I would be remiss not to point out DACA the DACA recipients are absolutely an important group, but I would be remiss to point out, especially in the context of higher education, that increasingly we are seeing more and more students who are actually fully undocumented. So their older siblings might be documented because they were able to qualify before 2017. And now we're increasingly seeing in higher ed that most are undocumented, fully undocumented. And de eso no se habla, of this we cannot speak, but it is very much
Absolutely.
A reality in higher education.
Absolutely. We know of a case of a sibling, a brother and a sister, and unfortunately the brother was never able to apply for DACA because obviously he was out of the criteria because of a couple of days. So, we all know that the DACA recipients and the undocumented population contribute almost $2 million in taxes, and we're, helping the economy, the workforce. But it's coming to a point there's been 20 to 30 years and we're not seeing the solution that we need. And this message of xenophobia every day seems to increase. And then the people with the most power are taking that microphone. And unless we go to the root of the problem, it's going to be very difficult to fully integrate our community. And it's a cliche, but we need Congress to act and to act now. And a lot of our local, governments are doing wonderful things. The city of Boston does amazing work at providing support for the undocumented community.
California is another
California
model.
is obviously at the top, but that's only going to last so long. We truly need this kind of space where academia, experts here, we all come together and we really say that as it is. If it's not for the immigrant population, what would become of the United States?
In contrast, what groups are best able to harness their higher education pathways?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because obviously, in my colleagues were saying that earlier that the second gen immigrants, right? And I'm still struggling with the terminology, but I think of some of our young people who are born in this country and they're brilliant and they're taking advantage of all these opportunities. But you know what? There's so many undocumented students that if they have the right support system, if they know where the resources are, if they're not defined by those narratives that, oh, poor little me, and those immigrants are also able to take advantage of the moment. And I bring this point because it is so important for academia and for any other institution to see the individual not just as a number. I went to BU, it's a huge school, and I was just a number. I don't think anybody, except maybe a handful of people, knew that I was there. And many times, you feel this sense of loneliness or I don't fit in. So providing support holistically is going to go a long way. Maybe you're not the most brilliant person in the room, but if you feel like there's individuals who see you, who understand that it's not just you, because you know that about the Latino community. Once you marry me, you're marrying my family, right? So the student has to deal with, taking care of mom, grandma, the smaller siblings. So sometimes they just need that support system. So I feel like individuals that have a support system, whether it be church, community, work, friends, professors, mentors, that goes a long way.
So working towards these partnerships.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one last question, and then before I move on to Nancy, and then we'll go into the whole group conversation. How do you currently partner with higher education institutions in your own work?
We're always so grateful when we are invited to come and share. And I feel that as someone who works with the immigrant community, I'm still learning this, that I'm not the leader and they're my subjects, right? The community are the experts in the room. And for us, I feel that when we're invited to these institutions, we bring the temperature, we bring the voice, or at least that's our call to share their story. So we tend to share best practices. There's always the opportunity for us to to provide some educational information. For example, we do these immigration workshops because sometimes faculty doesn't, they're not all attorneys. And it's important for us to bring some of that information, the latest on policy analysis, the importance for them to know they can refer students for us to do legal consultations. And it's that back and forth learning from each other.
Thank you very much. Nancy, I had the honor of meeting Nancy this year as she came to the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She arrived when she was 2 years old to the US and is currently pursuing her second master's degree. I've heard many compelling narratives over the years of doing research in this field and teaching at Harvard and NYU and UCLA and UMB, but hers is one of the most compelling. So could I ask you to briefly share what was your higher education journey, and your post?
Of course. Thank you. You're so kind. Well, I went to school. I say I'm from Texas. It's one of the interesting things. I've been out of the country for 12 years. And when I was here, I never, I felt like I wasn't allowed to feel like an American. And as soon as I stepped out, it's the accent, it's like the way of carrying myself. Everyone's like, no, you're an American, which is a very weird mental space to be in. But just to bring it back, I went from high school, I moved from California to Texas in junior high, so I was 13. And then I went to the University of Texas at Tyler, and I had a phenomenal time there, genuinely. It was great. I felt, at my school before, there was quite a difference between wealthy kids and then everybody else. So the wealthy kids could pay to go to the junior college and get dual credit, and then they could go to these fancy universities, but I didn't have $800 to pay per class, so I just had to take whatever was given to me. And not that it wasn't good, but I knew, I could see that it could be better. But I did go to the University of Texas at Tyler, and while I was there, I had phenomenal teachers, and I got to be legacy, the one student a year, and it was really great. I was on student government, and then I was undocumented, so I knew that in May of 2010, there was nothing for me. And I ended up cleaning houses with my mom for a year, and I just couldn't do it. It was just too much of a bump. And my senior year of college, I got a fellowship to go to DC, and I worked in DC, and just the real irony of being an undocumented person, this was 2010. Nobody was really coming out as undocumented. I mean, there were a few brave souls, and I was like, oh, no, more power to you, but I'm entirely too scared to do that. So being in DC and working with these people and just going back and cleaning houses for people I tutored in high school was intense, and I couldn't do it anymore. So after a year and a bit, I left. And so it was self-deportation, so I was banned from coming back for 10 years. And in that time, I lived in Japan, and then Mexico, Spain, and I did a master's in the UK, and now I've been living in Sweden. And I think it's one of those things, I've been a teacher, mostly, in all of these places, and it just seems, it hurts me on the inside to know that I'm teaching wealthy kids in other countries, and I've helped them get into really nice schools, and I've helped them pass English exams, and what I did is essentially help wealthy kids get better opportunities. And I would have loved to teach in my communities, but that wasn't something that was open to me.
Thank you for sharing that story. And I think it illustrates so poignantly, and you didn't say this, but if I may, when you told this to me the first time, you mentioned how you weren't able to see your family for 10 years.
Right.
So as a young woman, not being able to see anyone And, you know, so I'm a psychologist, from the psychological point of view, that's a very high price to pay. But so there was that. And then just if you want to use a pure econometric point of view, what a lost resource for the U.S. So thank you for sharing that story. I know I'm feeling the pressure of time of the joint questions that we need to engage in. So we've talked about some of the challenges for immigrant origin students. Let's just quickly go through that, because I think we already know at least one of the big challenges are documented students, undocumented students. What are some of the greatest challenges to immigrant origin students who seek pathways to citizenship? And then I want to get into opportunities and start thinking about solutions. So this is opening it up to the panel. Other groups that are facing challenges in the pathways to citizenship.
Well, all Americans, including immigrant origin youth, are facing the high cost of higher education. And as states disinvest in their institutions, the cost of tuition goes up. And when I attended UC Berkeley in the 1980s, it was affordable for somebody who just had a part-time job as a young person. And it really, the cost has just gone up across the country. So that is something, and it particularly affects immigrant origin youth because they are poor. And then, you know, people who want to immigrate, who come and attend college, there's no clear way for them to stay and work. It's a very complicated.
So for international students,
yes,
who come in under
yeah,
that category.
Yeah.
I would also, the other group that I would have to say that the critique that you hear on the airwaves in media is, why don't people just stand in line? Right? There's well, you know, I don't have a problem with legal immigration. I have a problem with folks not standing in line. And it's extremely important to point out that the backlogs are now extraordinarily huge. We have invested as a nation much more in border control than we are in having folks process applications.
Are you looking at me?
No,
So
I'm not
just-
looking. I don't want to put you. I am being a polite host, and I don't want to put you on the spot. So
I'll
anything
make
you
a-
could comfortably say.
I'll make a quick, a couple of points. So one thing that I think a barrier that we all agree, a major barrier, is that the agency, and I speak for USCIS that administers immigration law and lawful immigration, is that we are all operating under an outdated immigration system that it's in desperate need for reform. It needs to be modernized in a way to meet the needs of the 21st century, and that includes, you know, includes recruiting talents as well. So I think one of the biggest barriers is that Congress needs to act. We are in this beautiful room, and when Senator Kennedy was in the judiciary, there was, you know, work done across the aisle at a level that we still are not seeing. So I think Congress needs to act and come up with the compromise that really meets the needs of the 21st century, and that needs to happen. And until then, we are facing the barriers, and we are doing everything that we can. I mean, at USCIS, we are using every single tool in the toolbox to formulate policies and practices and clarify as many, you know, manual policies as possible to really deal with, you know, the outdated system. So that's one huge barrier. The other piece I was going to mention in terms of the solution and investment had some good news to share.
Good, let's get to that.
So the Office of Citizenship, which is within the Office of Citizenship Partnership and Engagement, received larger grants for immigrant integration and citizenship being an integral piece of integration. The Congress last year doubled the grants from 10 million to 20 million, and this year we have 25 million that the Office of Citizenship is in the process of formulating the notices for funding. And stay tuned, because soon we'll be able to work with agencies and invest this 25 million in the field of integration to really build capacity, to provide resources for those eligible to naturalize, and work with community nonprofit organization as well as local government. And I do want to say, in terms of solutions, that the Office of Citizenship in the last decade has invested over 132 million in immigrant integration through 579 competitive grants on the ground. Can we do more? Absolutely. But I think this is a great investment, and Congress is recognizing the need, and that's why we had more this year. And I do want to thank you for your advocacy as well, and continue to do so, because the agency, our USCIS, really operates under a fee structure. So this is a huge help. And the agency has really done tremendous work towards the backlogs that you mentioned. I am really pleased to share with you that we welcome over 1 million new citizens last year, an impressive number that we had not seen in 15 years. And that represents a 62% reduction in the backlogs. And we've done a lot of work on, reducing the time for processing on employment authorization. So there is progress, there is good news, but the big barrier continues to be Congress for not passing a reform that it's desperately needed.
So if you had the ear of policymakers, what policy actions would the panel recommend?
I would love to start with that question. And
Please.
I know that Adam left, but if someone could please pass him a note. I forget the exact number, but there is at least 3 million, probably more, undocumented individuals that, if the 3 and 10-year bar did not exist, they would be legalized at this moment. So perhaps we cannot get comprehensive immigration reform as we want it, but maybe we can start doing small changes. There's something called 245I. Some individuals, if that was expanded, right, if certain pieces of law were able to open again, a lot of individuals that have been in this country for 20, 30 years could have a shot at becoming legalized. So I think it's up to us, the community, higher ed, to start thinking outside the box and to start putting pressure on our government to say, there are ways for us to ask people to do things the right way, but you also need to be willing to work with us. So that will be my take. Hopefully someone can pass that note to Adam.
Thank you. Anyone else want to make recommendations at the policy level? No.
Just reaching out to members of Congress to focus on policy
Let's
and leave
do
the
it.
politics
Let's
aside.
just do it.
May I do one more, please?
Yeah,
because this
please.
is my.
Okay, well,
this,
I think you are- yeah.
this is. I'm so grateful for the work of USCIS, and we are so appreciative of these grants, and it enables our grassroots organizations to prepare people for the citizenship exam and all that good stuff. But you have no idea how many times I have to tell someone who wants to be a citizen so bad, they're not going to be able to become a citizen unless they learn English. And I'm talking to someone who's maybe 70, 75, 80, las abuelitas. Las abuelitas que nos han dado todo, the grandmoms that are so resilient and vigor, and we know that more than likely they're not going to be able to learn English. And I understand, Mr. McCarthy, that that's very important, that they need to learn English. But I wonder if we can at some point do something about this particular group of
The
individuals that
geriatric group.
love this country so much. And we're just making it so difficult for them to give us back as much as they want to give.
Check.
Thank you for that. So in the absence of federal level of immigration reform, as we await and wait and wait, what are some specific strategies that higher education institutions can use to get through or around current obstructions, particularly for undocumented students, but for international students and any other group? We have the ear of 500 people in the audience online and nearly 100 people here. So let's feed them ideas.
So many times undocumented students or DACA students are referred to the International Student Office on college campuses. And there are very different needs and very different issues that come up for those two groups. So I think, you know, the idea that you mentioned earlier of having someone who, or an office that can help with immigration issues and that can help people understand their own status, that the status of their family, but also, you know, we have a lot of resources for first-gen students. That's a new movement that's happened since I've been a professor, and I think it's been wonderful to educate both faculty and the staff at universities, but I think there's a lot more that can be done in terms of explaining to people what it's like to be the child of immigrants and needing to navigate American higher ed. So I think more resources for that would be excellent.
Culturally competent services.
Yeah, man.
And having people that look like us on those positions of power goes a long way. And I'm going to die saying this, but seeing the person as a person, seeing that they have needs past the academia, that's so important.
A whole person.
Invite someone to your home for Thanksgiving when everybody goes off and that student, international student, or that refugee stays by themselves. Invite them up for coffee so they feel that sense of warmth, family. Those values are so important for most immigrants.
I was just going to point to the importance of alumni networks, just bringing people, I mean, alumni for the school, obviously, but there are people who've managed to navigate these systems. And you're talking about cultural relevance. They can bring in that cultural relevance. And I feel like we're not doing enough. And it just seems like such like a
wasted
Yeah, it's such a
opportunity,
waste.
low-hanging fruit and a wasted
Low-hanging
opportunity.
fruit and something that's very doable. Just invite these people back, make a point of it, and make a point of making these relationships so that they can have a guide in navigating their unique experience.
Thank you for that. In respect of time, I'm going to bring us to a close. If you're joining us via live stream, this concludes our panel. Thank you so much for being with us today. We hope you will stay engaged and add your ideas and energy to creating a smoother pathway to higher education for immigrants, as well as a smoother pathway to immigration for immigrants attending or working in our colleges and universities. And for those of you who are in person, thank you for joining us. I want to thank our dynamic panelists for their thoughtful reflections. We hope that we have left you with food for thought, and that the panels today will foster conversations over lunch and the future and a sustained engagement in the service of harnessing the tremendous energies of these young people. Having had the pleasure and honor of working with them in so many different institutions over the last decades, I can attest that they are amongst the most talented and extraordinary human beings that we will ever find. Everyone is inspiring in their own right. What we do matters for each and every one of them, but it's also important for the future of higher education as well as the fabric of the nation that we would want to be. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.